line, okay, you are going to have to find a little space to put it that's safe, and that's fine. It's your palette to keep. You make it work. You are going to need at least your biggest flat brush and your small detail brush. I recommend having all three available if you can. Okay, walk in there. Did you get the first color kit? Okay, so the brushes are right inside the door. They're in a little container. Just grab one of each side. Yeah, so they're on, okay, turn the left down. They're in an organizer on top of that drawer set. Okay, you really only need like a little bit of each color. Don't feel like you have to do a ton. All right. Now, the reason why I did not give you green acrylic, although I do have green acrylic up front, is because green straight from the bottle is horrifying, okay? Unless you're doing Minecraft and it's meant to look like that. Most greens don't look anything like the green that comes straight from the bottle. So I give you these to encourage you to mix them. If you ever feel like you want a purple or a brown or something that's pre-mixed, you can use the bottles up front. But in your kit, I just gave you primaries in black and white because that's really all you need to make every color. All right, so for the solid fill, it's exactly what you think it is, okay? I want you to pick a color besides yellow or white. So either black, blue, or red. Okay, and I want you to take this, and this is where you learned a little bit about opacity. So who remembers what is the lowest pigment paint? Yellow, nice job. So yellow is super weak, and when you paint yellow on, you have to do layers and layers and layers of it. Red is a medium pigment, so you can do a little bit less layering and still get it opaque. But if you can see brush marks, in your paint, let it dry and then do a second coat over the top. In order to pass this one, I don't want to see any paper or brush marks coming through. Okay, it should be purely solid. Now, as a quick reminder, acrylic is made from latex. If you let it dry in your brushes, it will ruin them. So it's really, really good idea to make sure that you're always rinsing out your brush anytime you're not using it. Don't just sit it off to the side and let it stay and start soaking into your bristles, because even if it only dries part way, it's gonna start messing up your brush. Okay. Now we're actually gonna skip a section and we're gonna go over here to glaze. And for glaze, I actually want you to paint it yellow and just fill it in, do a solid fill. This one's a 2-step. So do a solid fill of yellow inside the glaze box or section. Okay. So a glaze is 2 parts, so I just want you to paint it yellow for now. But a glaze is just like it is in watercolor, although we call it a wash. In acrylic and oil, we call it a glaze, and that's where you do a slightly watered down wash, basically, over the top of another color. So if we were talking about oil painting, a lot of times the old masters, and if you do that kind of atelier technique of oil painting, would do like an underpainting with all the value on it, and then they would do glazes of like skin colors on top and build it up until they have those rich skin tones, which is kind of cool. But a lot of times we want to put down a solid color, so we kind of skip glazing. Okay, all right, this is one of my favorites. Again, we're jumping around because we're trying to put base coats in and let them dry, because acrylic does take longer to dry than watercolor does. Okay, so down here on the one that says scrape, you're gonna do a gradient. So you wanna take any 2 colors. I'm gonna do yellow and red because I like it when it looks like a sunset. Okay, you're gonna fill it up about halfway. Make sure you have lots of paint on there. This is scrape. Okay, make sure you have lots of paint, and then I'm going to go in with my second color on the bottom. And while that first color is still wet, I'm going to take and brush across the space between until I get a lovely clean gradient. Now, if yours is drying too quickly and your colors won't mix, layer. That's one of the cool things about acrylics. So mine started drying a little bit too fast, so I'm going to take some yellow, put it back on top. Wash my brush. Dry it off a little bit so I'm not adding water. And then I'm going to take my red. That's better. Now, the cool thing about acrylic is if you just brush over the part where the two colors cross over, it's going to start mixing. Unlike watercolor where you have to add water first, you can just do straight paint for this. But it blends really beautifully. Awesome, thank you. Okay, make sure you get a smooth blend between your two colors. Layer if you need to. If there's a line, you definitely need to layer. Okay, and then you're going to go down to the bottom where we left a space for gradient and just make another little one. So I'm going to do yellow. And actually this time I'm going to do yellow to green to blue. Okay, so we painted a gradient on scrape because we're going to be doing a second layer on that one in a second. And then down at the very bottom, you're just going to freehand another gradient. Now, something you'll may notice, if you have painted with acrylics before and these seem really thin to you, these are what we call soft body acrylics. They're easier to mix and they're a little bit less expensive. If you buy them in the tubes, those are heavy body acrylics and they work more like oils. So if that's been throwing you off a little bit, that's the difference. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so you should have solid colors in solid fill and glaze, and then we've got a gradient in scrape, and at the very bottom for gradient. And I will let you get caught up to that point. For gradient, you can do any other two colors. So you did a gradient inside scrape, but we're going to be covering part of that up. And then down at bottom, you're just doing a pure gradient. But you could do any two colors. So you could do a monochromatic gradient if you wanted to. Okay. All right, guys, as a quick reminder, you guys generally do really well. Please make sure your mask is up and covering your face during class. I realize they're kind of uncomfortable, but you should be pretty well used to it by now. Okay, so finish what you're doing. I'm just going to explain what's coming next. We're not actually painting yet, so keep doing what you're doing. For the dry brush section, we are going to be taking a dry paintbrush and a minimal amount of paint and just making marks inside of that. A float is a way that you can get a gradient in a small space, so this is one of my favorite techniques. And then I'm going to teach you how to do thin lines. So sometimes you want to do an outline with acrylic and it's gloopy and disgusting. I'm going to show you how to make slightly thinner paint and then how to brush it on so you can get lovely skinny lines. Okay. All right. So down on the bottom for gradient, if you have a solid line in between, which to be fair on this, you can't really see that mine blends super well. It blends better than it looks like it does. If you have a solid line in between the two, redo it. Find another little section, do a tiny gradient. You want to have a smooth blend in between your colors. I don't want to be able to see a hard line where your colors end. They should softly blend together. Anytime the color changes. Okay. All right, dry brush. So for dry brush, squeeze the water from your paintbrush. So I generally will actually take my brush like this and I'll either wipe it on a paper towel or I'll squeeze the water off starting at the base of the ferrule. So this part that holds the bristles in we call the ferrule. I would squeeze from the ferrule to the end of the brush tips, just over my water container. Make sure I'm squeezing out the extra water. You can also use a paper towel for this. And then to double check it, you just flick it back and forth across like the back of your hand. This will remove any excess water. You don't have to push very hard, you're just flicking it back and forth. Okay, and for this you want a dark color, so I'm gonna go with black. And this is the tricky part, so look up for a second. So I'm gonna dip just the very end of my bristles in the black, and then I'm actually gonna wipe most of it off. And then when I come in here to dry brush, I'm basically just brushing the rest of the paint off onto the paper. And that's all you have to do. So dry brush is intended to be a rough texture. This would be great like if I was trying to imitate wood texture, or if I wanted to, for example, do like blades of grass without having to paint all individual blades of grass, okay? Or fur, you can use dry brush. So you would do like a base color and then dry brush a slightly lighter or a slightly darker color over the top. And it's gonna give you that lovely texture. Okay, a float. So again, take a break, look up. So this time you're gonna need your flat brush, and you want it to be wet, like so wet that it's shiny. Then I'm gonna take the corner, and again, watch, because if you miss this part, it won't work. Okay, I'm gonna take just one corner of my brush and dip it in paint. Okay, so you can see only one side, just the corner. And then when I take it to my paper and press it down, and I pull a long stroke and then brush over it. See how that made a soft edge gradient? So for example, if you want to do a gradient in a tiny space that's hard for you to control, do a float. It will allow you to add a little bit of value, a little bit of shading to that section without you having to add lots of extra paint. Okay, so I'm gonna do it one more time. If you missed it, watch up. Okay, I have a flat paintbrush. Okay, not a round, a flat. I'm gonna take it and dip it just the corner in any color of paint. Okay, but only one side, only one corner. Okay, and then I'm gonna take it, set it down, brush over it multiple times, and you'll get a lovely soft edge gradient. Now, if it didn't work, you have that whole box, try it again. Or if you wanna just see if you can get it slightly better. Okay. Give everybody a couple of seconds to get caught up. All right. Okay, look up. We're going to show you how to do thin lines, then you can go back and get caught up if you need to. So I took a little bit of black and I just put some, like a little pile of it over here on this side. And what I'm going to do is add like 2 to 3 drops of water and just mix it all together. So it needs to be well mixed. You shouldn't have like water surrounding your paint. Okay, so the goal here is no matter how much black I'm using, I want to do like 3/4 black, 1/4 water. So if it's a little pile, just add a couple of drops to it. It doesn't need to be super thin. Okay, if it still feels kind of goopy, if it has a lot of texture, like yogurt, add more water to it. You want it to feel slightly runny, even though it's mixed together. If it's still got texture, like yogurt or honey, add more water. Mix it in. Okay, now take a break and look up. So this is where hand motion comes in. In order to get thin lines, you need to distribute the paint evenly throughout the brush so it's not just a big goopy ball on the end. So I take my brush, I'm gonna stick it in the paint and then twist it. So I'm just twisting my fingers as I pull it out, and then you'll notice it comes to that lovely fine tip and there's paint all the way across it. So just take it, get some paint on there, and then twist it as you pull up so it looks lovely and tiny, but it's full of paint. Okay, and then your goal is to make a long, thin line that's relatively even with few bumps. If it didn't work, try it again. So again, if you missed it, Once your paint is thinned, I'm gonna load up my brush, make sure I've got paint on all sides, and then twist and pull. So I'm just rolling my fingers around the brush. Okay, twist and roll. And then I'm gonna lay it down and start pulling. Now, some people go really slow, and that's where you'll start to see your hand shakes in the paint strokes. Once you've laid your brush down, just go. Pull it towards you. Okay, now you have the whole edges of your paper. You can't pass that off until you have a lovely straight line, so practice. Now, 2 tips that I will tell you. If you have your hand in the air and are trying to just like hold your hand floating while you do a line, that's gonna be really hard. You wanna brace it against the table. So I either have the whole side of my hand resting on the table, or sometimes if I'm trying to do a really skinny one, I'll just put my pinky out and I'll rest my hand on my pinky. Okay, lay it down, pull. Also, you wanna hold it like you're holding a pencil, okay? And keep your fingers light. If you're gripping your paintbrush, you're gonna get heavy lines. So loosen up your fingers a little bit. Rest your hand against the table. Do a long pull. Okay. All right, now if you need to come back to this, you can. We're gonna move on for those people that are finished. And we're gonna do scrape. Now this is possibly my favorite one on here. It just looks really cool. We did the first layer of scrape. So make sure it's dry, just like test it with your finger, make sure it's dry. If it's not, maybe wait for this for a second. Okay, and then you're gonna do a layer of pure black across the top. But wait. So make sure that while it's still really wet, then I want you to take the other side of your brush handle and draw a design through it. Okay, make sure that bottom layer is dry. Paint black over the top while it's still really wet. Use the handle of your paintbrush and scrape off some of that black. Game changer. It's like really quick scratch art. Okay, if it didn't work for you, that's probably because you let your black dry too fast. Find an empty section of your paper, do another little gradient, or even a solid color. Let it dry, then do the black on top and quick scrape it. It's just because you let it dry too fast. If you need to go back and redo a float or a thin line, now would be a great time to do that. We're gonna move on in about 30 seconds. Okay, deep breaths, you got this. Bless you. Thanks, Ethan. Okay, now for edge, to do the edge section, you only have to paint half of this. I recommend doing blue for this one, but you could do any color except white, okay? And what you're gonna do is try and create, you're gonna paint in half of it and then try and do a perfectly straight, hard edge. Now, there are 2 things I will tell you, so look up really fast. This will help you. Okay, if you have a whole bunch of paint on your brush, and you're trying to paint an edge like this, see how it's rough on that side? It's all goopy, okay? That is just the way paint works. So in order to stop it from happening, instead of pulling the whole brush towards me, I'm gonna turn it sideways Okay, and I'm gonna use the skinny part of that brush and just pull it in a line. And that way I don't have extra paint squeezing around the sides. Okay, you're just gonna paint in half of it. And then use your brush. So again, instead of using the full flat of the brush, I'm tipping it sideways and using the skinny part. And I'm just running it along that side to even out the edge. So it doesn't matter if you've even already painted an edge and it's gross, just take this and slide it sideways to clean it up. It'll redistribute the paint and make it nice and clean. Okay, 30 more seconds. If you finish early, just wait for a second. Everybody else will get caught up. Now, removing water while you're finishing that, there's a couple of ways you can do it. So we talked about you can use your paintbrush and just kind of squeeze the water out. You can brush it against a paper towel. Two things I will tell you. If you tap your brush against the side of your container, I do that 100% when I'm at home. However, if you do it here, you're gonna splatter water across somebody else's project, okay? So I would prefer not to hear this, even though that's naturally what we all wanna do, just because it does release water and usually splatters your paper or somebody else's or the table. So please use a paper towel to dry your brushes instead of tapping them, because if you tap very often, it can cause you some genuine difficulties. Okay, pointillism. So for this one, you're gonna need a color and then white. So you can use one of the colors that you already have, or you can mix one if you want a pretty new one. Okay, we're gonna start on one side and you're gonna use the wrong end of your brush and make polka dots. This is any color. Now, here comes the tricky part. For pointillism, you cannot use the hair side, it has to be the rounded end. Once you get halfway across, switch to white. And start doing white. Now, if yours transitions too quickly, go back in, add some dots of like red or your original color. It'll mix with the white. But I don't want to be able to see any of the paper showing through. I know, that's why it's tiny. Make it smaller if you need to. If you didn't believe me and made it huge. Now notice, I've gone most of the way across with my red. You want to go pretty far and then go in and start using your white on top. Did you have to throw away a lot of them? How much?
Just a little bit.
Not too
Most
bad.
of them are.
Okay.
You've got a can of beer back there.
I do.
You know, like to clean off keyboards and stuff.
Yes.
Do you know that if you hold them upside down and put them at something like cardboard, it freezes the surface of it?
Really?
It's because it's full of CO2. So when you release the actual CO2 itself,
Good to know. I'm gonna have to try it. No, I'm curious. Okay, so you should be able to see it change from your color to white or a lighter version of that color with dots in between, no paper showing. If you haven't been using a paper towel, you should be. Maybe go grab one. If you've got anywhere it's not transitioning very well, take a second and go back in and fix it. Okay. And I gotta clean your brush. end in between. All right, raise your hand if you need a little more time. Excellent, you've got it. 30 more seconds. Okay, those of you that are done, I want you to mix green. Okay, those of you that are finished, I want you to mix green. Because yellow is the most expensive pigment. So you just have to do more layers of it.
No, I think it's like
It's extremely runny.
no, I think I just like added water.
Oh, I see. I was gonna say, it naturally is gonna do that, but yeah, it's possible if it just looks like tainted water. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. All right, so I'm gonna take and then mix a green. It can be a medium green or a lime green, doesn't really matter. But you want a good sized pile of it. Like there should be quite a bit. So you can see like I'm mixing a whole little pile. You need at least like a pea-sized chunk of green. If you don't have that much, mix more. Okay, and then you're gonna mix a tint and a shade of that green. So I'm gonna take just a little bit of black and then off to the side, I'm gonna mix a little pile of dark green. Wash my brush. Mix a little pile of light green. And you still want some medium green left. Yeah, you just add white and add black separately. So you should end up with 3 greens. Okay, and then you're gonna take, you can either do your medium-sized round brush or your detail brush. Please don't do your big flat brush. And I want you to start with the medium green and you're gonna do dashes. And you wanna kind of spread them out, leave a little bit of space in between. This is the dash stroke box. There's a reason we call it the dash stroke box. Okay, and then I'm gonna start filling in those gaps. So I'm gonna take my dark green, make some dashes, fill it in. And when I'm done, you shouldn't be able to see any paper through it. So I took my medium green, I did some dashes, then I'm starting to fill up the gaps in between with the tints and shades of green. Now, the reason why we do a dash stroke, sometimes if you want to do like grass or flowers, you don't want to have to paint every individual one. A dash stroke is a good way to make it look like you did a lot of work, even if you didn't. So by doing variations of colors, so slightly lighter, slightly darker, and then kind of blending them together, it gives the illusion of depth without you having to have hand mixed and hand painted all those little sections. So same thing like if I wanted to do leaves on a tree, I would use a dash stroke. Okay, if I want to do water, I would do tints and shades of blue, dash stroke. Bless you. Okay, if yours is starting to look all the same, that's probably because your tints and shades weren't very different. Go back in and just use some pure white or pure black on top and let it mix with your wet paint. And you want to fill up the whole thing. So you're using your green and then a tint and a shade of green. Okay, and then your last step, which you can do as soon as you finish anything, is down in the bottom where it says stencil. Just fill in like a solid fill. And then we're actually going to do this one next time. No, it's just whatever color you have left that you want to get rid of. You're going to paint it in there. So yours might look brown or whatever. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to leave this up. As soon as you finish, you're going to come pass that off with Ethan in the back. And then you're working on your illustration. Now I have some good news for you. I'm going to post the calendar up here in just a second.